Sony A6000 is one of the best-selling cameras of all time and one of the most readily available options in the used camera market. I've had the A6000 for many years and used it in a variety of production scenarios for photography and videography, but it wasn't until recently when I started doing a lot of these reviews of the Sony NEX series cameras that I thought to do a review about the A6000 and think about who this camera might be for in 2023. So in this video, we're going to answer two specific questions. First, should you go ahead and purchase the Sony A6000 over the NEX series cameras and just forget those? And the second question being, should you go ahead and just even save more money and upgrade the A6000 to one higher in Sony's lineup like the A6700, the A6600, or maybe even a full frame style camera like the A7 II? But before we answer those questions, we need to talk about the good things about the Sony A6000, starting with its incredible autofocus system. When this camera was released in 2014, this had one of the best autofocus systems in the world. I rarely have issues when taking photos with the Sony A6000 acquiring focus. It almost is never a problem for me. I can usually hit my focus point dead on, and I really don't have any issues, which is a really nice thing to say about a camera that comes in around the $350 to $450 price point on the used camera market. When this camera was released in 2014, body only, it was $650. So now that it's on the used camera market and readily available for a lot of sellers, I've seen them as low as $250. $300 is a little bit more typical to be on the lower end. And then usually you can guarantee yourself to be able to find one for $350 to $400, which, I mean, it's getting up there in price a little bit more. It's not like a super cheap camera like some of the NEX cameras I've done, but there are a few key features that really set this apart from those other NEX models. So besides high quality photos, we also get 1080p video in the XAVCS codec, which is a higher quality codec than all of the Sony NEX series cameras shoot in. One of the weirdest things to me though that I cannot figure out is why Sony decided to brand this camera. You see that right there? It says AVC HD. That is the older codec that all of the Sony NEX cameras had, and that's kind of the feature that they boasted was AVC HD, right? But then this camera puts in XAVCS, which is a way better video result, but then it still branded itself as AVC HD. I do not know why Sony chose to do this. That feature alone is a typical reason why I don't recommend someone buy the Sony A5000 over the A6000 and the A5100, which, little known fact, the A5100 and the A6000 have the exact same camera sensor and both shoot in the XAVCS codec, versus the A5000 is basically an NEX camera rebranded as the Sony A5000 and still shoots in the AVC HD codec. As far as the design of the A6000, it's very similar to the Sony NEX6, but as you compare it to the other NEX cameras, you certainly have a lot more functionality and customization options with the button layouts. We also get the updated menu system in this camera that we did not see in the Sony NEX line. It's not the newest menu system from Sony, but it's a better menu system. It's more in line with like the Sony A7 III and the other A6000 series cameras. I want to narrow in a little bit on the Sony NEX6 and the A6000 because there's such a similar result as far as photos are concerned. I'm going to flash some different photos on the screen of the two cameras, and you can see that as far as photography, these cameras both perform very similar, and you're going to get a very equal kind of photo quality out of these cameras. It's very hard to tell which raw file came out of which camera. If you just look at these side by side, you look at the raw files, it's hard to tell. But as you look at the video files side by side, this is where you can certainly tell a difference between the A6000 and the NEX6. And the reason why I'm comparing the NEX6 and not one of the other NEX cameras is because the NEX6 was actually the latest and greatest model of Sony NEX cameras. It was the last one to get produced. I know it seems like the NEX7 would be the last one in the lineup, but that was actually released fairly early in Sony's NEX camera line. It was released closer to like when the NEX 3 and 5 were released. And then they did all these like iterations and updates with the 5 and the 5N and the 3N, all of these little intricacies in between. And then the final one that was released was the Sony NEX6. So it's the closest model to the A6000. So I think that's the fairest comparison to make between the two of them. And as I see the two cameras, I really kind of view them as siblings. They're very similar in a lot of ways. The button layouts are very similar. They kind of look the same, and they perform very similarly for photography. An interesting fact about the NEX6 is you actually get a higher resolution viewfinder. I really like the viewfinder in the NEX6. Then when we get the A6000, for whatever reason, they reduced the resolution of the viewfinder. So my viewfinder experience for taking photos, actually the winner of that goes to the NEX6. Okay, I know that's a ton of detail and photo samples, etc., but I want you to make an educated decision when you're looking at the NEX line and the A6000 line, and the A5000 and the A5100. There's a ton of options from Sony for these budget mirrorless style cameras that are all not in production anymore. These are all kind of like the used camera market we're talking about here, but you need to make the right choice for you specifically. So let's go back to those questions that we asked ourselves, right? First, should you go for the A6000 over the rest of the NEX series cameras, especially like the Sony NEX6? I think the answer is, if you are a video creator, certainly. You should go for the A6000. The main reason being, the XAVCS codec is just going to be better for video results, and you also get a better autofocus system for continuous autofocus tracking, which is really important for video creators. But if you're just looking for a camera to take photos, I think the A6000 is very on par with the Sony NEX6, the 5R, the 3N, all of those kind of NEX cameras that I did reviews on. Those are great options for photographers. So you got to think about, what do you want your dollars to accomplish? Are you wanting to get a pretty good video camera to be able to use for a B cam or a YouTube style setup? I think this is the better option for video. But if you want kind of like a walk around photography camera that you could take on trips, or a second camera that you could take to portrait sessions, or however you want to use it, I think one of those NEX cameras would actually get you pretty equal results to the A6000. And then our second question was, should you save up and actually go for a different camera in the A6000 lineup? And for me personally, I think the only cameras that I would consider over this camera would be the Sony A6700, which is just in its own class. That camera is like hardly even could be considered an A6000 series camera. It's a brand new, a ton of new features. There's just so much going for that camera. It doesn't even really compare to the A6000. Or the Sony ZV-E10, which is technically not an A6000 series camera, but it has the same sensor as a lot of those A6000 cameras. And you're really not getting a ton with the 6100, 6300, the 6400, and 500, and 600. All of those sort of have the same sensor. You're not getting a huge upgrade by going for one of those over the A6000. I think if you're looking for one of those, you might as well just get the A6000 if you're trying to get a budget option, or if you're really wanting to invest in something good that's really good for video, go for the A6700 because you're gonna get better results. I hope this video has been helpful for you as you try to navigate all of these used cameras. There's so many great options for photo and video creators. It makes my head hurt sometimes, but I hope this video answers many specific questions that I often get on Instagram or YouTube about the A6000 or the NEX or the A this or this, that, and the other. I hope this video is helpful for sort of navigating all those questions that you might have. Thank you for taking time to watch this video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I have many more videos you can watch on this channel right here. Thank you so much, guys. Much love.